it's time to get into it. So welcome everyone to this Placer AI webinar, The State of Malls. This is one of our favorite topics. And part of the reason it's one of our favorite topics is we get to bring back one of my favorite guests, Colin Shaughnessy, EVP at URW. Colin, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for the invite. Good to see you, Ethan.
So one of the people who my favorite to talk in this space, because I think, again, very forward thinking and ahead of the curve in terms of where the mall space is going. So exciting to be able to check in. We're going to break down today's conversation into a few pieces. So we'll do, as always, a very quick introduction to Placer for those of you who are unfamiliar. We're going to talk about mall performance for what we've seen thus far in the year. We're going to talk about bigger questions that are facing the mall space. And we're going to leave a little bit of time to already give a look ahead at the holidays. And then, as always, we're going to take Q&A. If at any point throughout the conversation you do have a question, please use the Q&A button situated at either the top or bottom of your screen, depending on how you have Zoom configured. And we will try to get to those questions either within the course of the conversation or towards the end. But send them in sooner rather than later, and we can make sure we get to more of them. So for the intro to Placer. Placer's a location data company. What that means, people vote with their feet. We show you how they vote across the United States every single day. We do that by observing a panel of tens of millions of devices. Very critically, this is all aggregate de-identified data, so we are GDPR and CCPA compliant. We then analyze that data with machine learning and AI algorithms and present it in a wealth of different reports within our platform on everything from demographics, visitor journey, visit trends, void analysis, and a whole lot more. If anyone is interested, we do have a free version of our premium product available on our website, and we have a section called The Square that is the home to our free tools. Now we kind of dive in, and let's start with, I guess, that top level look, Colin, of what we've seen from malls. And I think to a large extent, we have seen this very unique and very volatile environment. And I think, since the pandemic ended, and even though we might have expected some degree of normalcy, we've seen, economic challenges, we've seen high gas prices and all these elements that impact the consumer and the visit. How has mall performance aligned with what your expectations were, considering this period of challenges?
Well, just to kind of frame up, obviously, our expectations are based on a much smaller subset than we used to, being a much smaller company in terms of portfolio size. But I think we're still seeing a lot of what we expected for the last couple of years, where you're having those shopping centers, the malls, that can win market share, continue to take traffic and increase. We don't see that difference in this chart here between the A pluses versus the Bs, and those that are losing that are kind of going the opposite direction. We've seen that in our portfolio. Some of the assets we've been fortunate enough to divest, they were losing in the market share game, and those that are doing well, we still continue to see some traffic push forward, and we've seen positive numbers throughout the year. But overall expectations, I think, in line with expectations. I'm expecting the fall season to rebound quite nicely, because we have had a mass exodus of Americans to Europe throughout the summer.
I mean, it's super interesting. And I think it's also kind of bears noting that on this slide, you have that peak. It's not a decline. It's actually just a significant height hit at the start of the year, because you had that powerful overlap where January 1st was a Monday, and you had that Sunday also that's something we saw in the weekend before as well, in Christmas last year. But I think, and you kind of mentioned this, there are a lot of malls that are overperforming as well and driving really significant traffic. When you think of these kind of overperformers, what are the factors or the elements or characteristics that join them together, and what are the lessons for the wider kind of mall community to learn from those successes?
Two very good examples you posted on the slide, Ethan. Valley Fair in San Jose, massive reinvestment, which is something landlords were able to do much more frequently pre-COVID, being in stronger financial positions almost across the board. Massive reinvestment. It actually opened up 5 days before COVID hit. It has continued to see traffic and sales grow month over month since COVID ended. We've also seen, again, market conditions play to our favor, where San Francisco, we've seen a massive downturn. As everyone knows, that city's been one of the hardest, if not hardest hit city in the United States. Everything's kind of moved down the peninsula towards San Jose. So a reinvestment, refresh, something fresh and new for the consumer, gives us the ability to see traffic and sales increase across the board. Montgomery's based in Bethesda, so that's the DC market. And DC was very slow to recover post-COVID. If you were to look at sales increases through 21 and 22. The DC market was really slow. We started to see increases last year, and you can see that ramping up at the beginning of the year in January. And it's been very good for us. It's an asset where we're getting ready to spend a lot of money, densifying mixed use opportunity for us that we're fully entitled and getting ready to launch next year. We're excited about that one. But I think that's more market driven there. And I think if you look across the country, you've seen some of the same things. Texas, Florida, shooting through the stars first few years post COVID. They've slowed down because again, we can't expect these trees to go to the sky.
Yeah, I mean, I think you make a really important point of, I mean, we talk about this a lot in the retail side of, there is this combination of trend alignment and then really smart strategic decision making that needs to come together. And I think that if anything, the last few years have taught us, it's that there's a little bit of kind of, you don't want to call it luck, but like luck in the picture of when things move in your direction and you've made smart decisions, you're positioned to ride these waves. But the strategic decision making needs to be there as well. Like you have to have a clear sense of, you talk about these reinvestments quite a bit of, how do you strengthen these centers and what does the consumer want and how is that evolving and changing?
Look, it's definitely been a lot of luck post-COVID. I think every landlord, including URW, we've been hit with bad luck in multiple situations where assets have taken a downturn, and there really hasn't been anything that we could do about it. And there's a couple that come to mind. In other instances, we had a big plan in place pre-COVID, and we were doing massive redevelopments and reinvestments, especially in our West Coast assets. That put us in a really good position when COVID hit, because coming out of COVID, landlords, we don't have as much money to reinvest and refresh and make our places like new and to invigorate them the way the consumer's expecting us to. So we have an advantage on a number of them. But again, that's timing, a little bit of luck, and some fortuitous planning, but it started years ago.
Yeah, I mean, it's the one thing, like I do think that gets kind of missed in the shuffle sometimes, is when you think about kind of narratives, especially in the media versus reality. Like successes were thought of, it's ideas that were decisions that were made years prior. And even the challenges, it takes time for a lot of these things to be put into place just because there are so many elements involved. But one of the things that we've been looking at quite a bit is kind of what we've seen in the back to school season and what we saw with kind of the summer. What are your takeaways from what you saw in terms of the summer and the back to school season, and what you think that might mean for the rest of this year?
I think I went in a bunch of stores in my trip to New York last month, and it's funny because trends that were hot 20, 30 years ago have suddenly made a massive switch back into trend. I'm thinking more in the teen sector, where you've got big boxy tops, the huge baggy pants. I went into Abercrombie & Fitch's new store, and literally I couldn't even recognize the merchandise they were selling. It was so new in what I'd seen in their stores, but so on trend. And then you go and you look at their sales reports and their performance, and it's shooting through the moon. I mean, they literally hit it out of the park. They did exactly what the consumer wanted, and they had to have done that months prior, because we know you have to buy a couple seasons prior. So that was a big win for them. I was surprised to see that sort of thing. You've seen some other retailers kind of miss it a little bit, especially in that sector, and it's been quite a fickle sector, I think, for the teen retailers.
It's interesting because you think about like the retailers that have felt really well positioned and those that have felt like, oh, wow, they're operating in a much more difficult environment. And I think apparel definitely rings that bell, but there are still so many segments that are doing very, very well. And even in the face of that, and there's something to be learned from the success, even in difficult scenarios. I think another element that we talk about quite a bit is how different this is regionally, right? So, we saw during periods, especially in like the immediate aftermath of the pandemic, where the West Coast was hit harder than certain areas in the South and the Southeast, or the Northeast was doing better or worse than some other areas. How does this kind of regional understanding and these regional shifts, how did that play into mall performance? And how do you balance between being an operator that has assets all over the country, but also being impacted by these very regional, localized challenges?
There's a couple of things we look at when we're factoring it in. One is typical or non-typical weather events that can occur in certain places. Obviously, we just had a hurricane here in California, or almost hurricane hit us, where that can make a big dent in what sales and traffic are going to look like for a key summer week. things like that happen in the Northeast all the time. For us, it's a little less regionally like this and a little bit more segmented towards individual cities. So for us, we're based in San Diego, LA, Northern California, Seattle, Chicago, New York, and DC, and that's it. So it's 7 key markets for us. And in each one of those markets, you're kind of looking at who's your competitive set, what are they doing, and how are they performing? Because I can't literally just look at this map and say, okay, our West is performing above 2.3%. That means we're good. And the Northeast at 1.4. It's tougher. I mean, you look at a place just outside of New York City, like Northern Jersey. That's one of the most highly competitive retail landscapes anywhere in the world. And it's tough. And, we'd be super excited if we were continuing to see positive numbers there. But when you have so much going on in a small submarket like that, it's tough to see the growth that you want often.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and it's also understanding that different areas are going to produce different things, and that many of the patterns that I think we saw in the immediate aftermath of the pandemic were unique patterns. So, we talked. You mentioned this of like how much of people were traveling to Europe. What does that mean towards spend for those people who couldn't travel to Europe a few years ago? And then you're making that comparison to that period.
Well, and if you looked at that map just for one more second, I mean, you look at the South and it's showing negative. If we were to rewind 12 months ago, I mean, 100%. It was a completely different story. So at the same time, what I've heard from a lot of retailers in different segments, including the luxury segment, which we know has been down this year, they're looking at kind of 2022 and 2023 as like a 2-year period. And you can kind of draw a line of growth between those two versus one massive mountain and then one massive decline. Because what you're going to find in most cases, any relevant retailer who's doing their job well, you'll see an increase from 21 through 23 when you look at the compound over 2 years versus many have seen huge spikes in 22 and then some decreases in 23.
I guess the right way to do. We've also, talked so much about the pull forward of demand in other segments like home improvement or consumer electronics. If you see a unique confluence of factors driving this powerful or this peak, it's not possible to sustain it. I think that context. I mean, we always use this silly example of if LeBron James scores 35 points a game one year, and the next year he scores 32 points a game. 32 points a game isn't bad, even if it's 10 whatever percent less. And so I think that context is so critical when we're understanding retail and retail performance. But one of the other things that we've seen, obviously, as we move into kind of the bigger questions, is a change in the consumer. So when you think about what we've experienced in recent years, and things like shifts in how often a consumer is visiting, shifts in where the consumer is going, or how often they're going to work. How does this influence the way you view a mall's roles, and even in operating a mall?
I think there's a lot of different subsets in the question. One, when office workers aren't there, and if you're in a CBD type market or something that has a lot of office population around it, the reliance on food, especially during the lunch hours, becomes something that's much more challenged. In our assets, we're questioning what food courts look like, or dining terraces of the future, and do we even need them in the same regard, because sales have gone down in a lot of cases. We're seeing them pick up recently, but again, I think there's a lot of policies changing within individual companies about who and how and when people need to return to the offices. Daytime traffic in some places has been down, so we've had to lean heavier into how we're going to pull people in on the nights and weekends. And that's where we get into the whole dining conversation, where we haven't talked about it yet, but in order to be relevant in any landscape of retail today, you've got to find a way to be competitive and at a top tier have market defining dining within your place. So if you don't have dining that competes with the best streets anywhere within your market, chances are you're not going to be able to pull the people in at night and over the weekends. But the coolest dining concepts only want to be where the cool people are going, which means the setting has to be right, the ambiance has to be right. You got to work with your designers and make sure your sense of place is right, or they're not going to want to be there. And that's the challenge that goes back to landlords having less capital. Where are you going to put it and deploy it? Because you have to make sure that your places can pull that traffic in, and especially at the key moments, because you're not getting it as much during the days, especially in the office markets.
I mean, you touched on such a really interesting kind of challenge to cope with, which is you expect a certain amount of traffic, so therefore your orientation towards building these spaces from a dining perspective is, well, what about it's for the daytime traffic, therefore the ideal kind of pace setting experience is going to be X. But then if it shifts to evening and weekend, it's a different thing entirely. Like, how do you approach kind of the finger on the pulse in order to make those decisions?
I think it's a lot about going out and seeing who's doing what well, whether it's in cities in this country or other places. Because at the end of the day, when you're talking about dining decisions, those are expensive and long term. And if you get them wrong, I mean, that could set you back a long period of time. Anytime you open up a restaurant, we all know it's taking forever to get the leases signed, forever to get the permits, construction's taking forever. That could be a 2-year process in some cases. And then if they're not successful, I mean, that's a big gamble. So it's really finding the right partners, people that you know can do I mean, at the end of the day, it's the ambiance, the sense of place with the restaurants, but then the food. If you can get people, creators to do both of those really well, I think then you can feel more comfortable in those decisions. But they're risky and they're tough. And then you got to have a lot of it. I mean, big super regional fortress shopping centers 10, 12 years ago, they might have had 5, 6, 7, maybe on a good day, 8% dining across the entire asset. You can double that now and still have room to grow.
So it's just more pushes into this riskier space because how important and how long term the decision.
Yep.
Another area that's really been interesting to me, and it kind of been like a mini obsession, is the pronounced difference between retail that is oriented towards experience and retail that is here's a place to just kind of come in and buy a product. And I think what's interesting is when we talk about this, there's always this intention of, I think there's a conversation around what's experiential and what's experience retail. Experiential is like, oh, cool, we put up a climbing wall and it's a little bit more gimmicky, but there's an urgency that's created. Whereas experience is, walking into the Rolex store and then laying out the mat and treating it with a degree of panache that like helps create the vibe that is necessary. I think and I think what's interesting about malls is they're kind of uniquely oriented towards experience retail, where you kind of come in, you spend more time, you're more invested in the longer journey that you're there. How do you lean into an advantage like this? How do you kind of orient yourselves towards providing something that's a little bit more wide and holistic like experience?
It's extremely challenging for the teams. One, on two ends. As a landlord, you've got to find a reason to pull the consumer off the couch and into our places, because the experience that they get when they come to our places has to be different than they get anywhere else. It's a commodity, right? You've got to show up and feel like you're in a place that's delivering something that I can't get anywhere else. And then you've got to merchandise your centers with the food tenants, our restaurant partners, and the retailers who deliver what you were just explaining, an experience within an experience. It's not easy. And the challenge also, we ask the retailers all the time, what are you going to do that's different? Because anyone who's resting on the laurels of 1 year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, they're going to quickly find themselves irrelevant, because our situation's changing so quickly in each one of these competitive landscapes where our places reside. And it's a challenge. It's definitely a challenge. And because of that fast change that you're seeing with what's hot, how do you stay relevant? How do you take market share? The teams are having to work at what feels like a constant sprint, which can be exhausting.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I think one of the graph series focuses on Shein, and we had a question come in about it, and it was, do you have any kind of reference articles or background on how the Shein pop-up was communicated and promoted to shoppers? The honest truth is, I have it mostly anecdotally, so I don't have strong background, but we know that there was a really a strong push in at least some of the cases that we were aware of to kind of get the word out. But yeah. I mean, Colin, I wonder your thoughts on this. Like when you have a concept like a Shein where you have this potential to generate excitement and interest, how do you kind of take advantage of those pop-ups to get the message out, or how would you optimize that process?
We've got to give the marketing and the social teams first and foremost. We're fortunate here on our sales team, within the leasing confines, we also have an experiential media team, so we can push it out to the customer and kind of attack, or at least connect with them in more of a 360 holistic way. So if we were to do something with a pop-up tenant, we'll typically do an event we'll give them a pop-up, and we'll make sure we get them all over our digital within a market or a given center. It's an opportunity for us to connect more with the customer, and we can do a lead up to it. We did a really cool event earlier this summer. We have a pop-up across the street at Century City. So we partnered with John Legend, the singer, to open up his cosmetic brand. It was the first time he put it into a store. I didn't even know he had one. Our team found him and worked with him. So as part of him doing a pop-up, we were also able to work with him to do his only live performance in LA at Century City one night as well, and do a ticketed event and give away the proceeds to charity. But that type of thing, obviously we sold it through social. The tickets sold out quite quickly. And then guests who were walking through the center on that random Friday night walked up and heard John Legend singing for 45 minutes. It was pretty cool. But when it comes to Shein, obviously they have their connection with people through social and their database. They've done a nice job in pushing it. I know we did one at South Center, south of Seattle, up in the Pacific Northwest. And there was a line when they showed up. It was relatively eventful, a couple of days where they popped up through a weekend, I believe. But again, I think and we make decisions often quickly based upon what we think we can bring with traffic and stuff. This is when we probably took a step back. I know we took a step back. I did as well after the partnership we did with Shein, and then we just decided, is this the type of partner we want to be partners with? From an ESG perspective, we're moving forward at a really, really fast pace, and I don't know that someone like Shein, and this can be controversial to some, is the type of partner that we're going to have. They want to do a bunch more pop-ups all over the country. For those that are listening, you can reach out to them if you want. We've turned down the next couple opportunities with them based upon that.
Well, I think that you speak to, we talk about this a lot, the idea of like the brand of the shopping centers too. Like I think there's an expectation, there's a recognition of a Westfield center, there's a recognition of a lot of, especially on a local level, there's a relationship with a center. And I think tapping into that marketing capability to promote understanding that there are right and wrong partners, what kind of a community expects, I think is a really important piece of the puzzle. A really interesting question came in though. It's like in between traditional experiential and traditional retail are kind of use cases like daycare, post offices, medical, and these use cases do create traffic, especially during the day. What are your thoughts on I know I've heard you talk on some of this, but what are your thoughts on some of those not classic retail tenants that can have a role in these centers?
Oops, sorry, hold on. I was not moving quick enough. My lights turned off. Look, I challenge the team often, and does anyone within the company. If you're anywhere traveling in the world or in your cities and you see people standing in line, that means they're willing to give their time to something. If they're willing to give their time to something, why not get that time in our places? Because then we can do what we do best, which is connect them with other brands or other retailers or other uses. Look, I don't know what the right percentage is per asset, because I think it differs whether you're a lifestyle center with residential attached. You're going to want more of these daily needs and services. Fortress assets with historical department stores that kind of plague our ability to turn them inside out unless we put in big capital. You want to find room for those uses, but again, most consumers are looking for something much easier to pull up and gain access. But if you can find uses where people have to go, it's a commodity, they've got to go there once, twice, 3 times a week, then you're starting to build up that repetitive visit, which is so important to us as well. How often are people coming? How many stores or places are people visiting when they come? Those are metrics that everybody should be monitoring, because as they go up, that means you're doing the right thing. If they're going down, that means you're putting the wrong people into your places.
Is it hard though to optimize for like different journey types? So for example, let's see if a fitness tenant, the ideal co-tenants might be, I don't know, a juice bar where you can get the protein shake after a workout. Whereas if you're optimizing for, an apparel tenant, it's obviously going to be different co-tenants that work best. How do you kind of put together that puzzle of different brands, different journeys, different types of co-tenancy and value?
It's completely different per asset. And if anyone tries to blanket statement it across their assets, they're likely to lose. You've got to really, really hone in on who your customer is and who's coming there. We've got leasing people that are super talented within our organization, but they know best. If they were to lease their places based upon their own wants and desires, we'd likely fail. So we've got to pay attention to the data that you're able to provide us. Who's our customer? Why are they coming? Where are they shopping before? Where are they shopping after? Because those are the types of places we can integrate into our places, because we know that they're on the same journey, the same trip, the same path of travel when that customer leaves their house. That stuff's invaluable to us, and we pay a lot of attention to it. But there's no perfect way to say it. It's a tough one.
And I like that, but I think the idea that it is a local space by space kind of perspective is the necessary starting point. I think, which is, we got a question that came in, are movie theaters a draw? When our children were young, this was a good place for them to be while we shopped. Which is a perfect segue into the next slide. Because I mean, it was insane the type of impact that the Barbie and Oppenheimer movie launches had. They've sustained into August. July was the best month for AMC and Regal, or the fourth best month since our data begins in January 2017. It was tremendously successful. I mean, what's interesting though, Colin, I don't know if you remember this. I feel like it was last year or the year before, and we've done this a couple of times. You were very bullish on the future of movie theaters. You said it needs to change or evolve, but you were really excited about what this sector could do. And I know you predicted the Barbie movie.
I don't know if I predicted the Barbie movie.
But what is this latest thing? Does it like deepen your bullishness, or has your opinion changed?
Look, my gut continues to be the movie theaters are going to continue to thrive. I want to have a lot more confidence in how their financial picture behind the scenes looks. I think that's the challenge. It doesn't help that the writers are on strike and product could be short for a period of time in a year and a half as well. Hopefully there's a backlog. A year ago, you're right. It's funny you remember that, but I was predicting that the end of the year would be substantial and that it would bleed into a successful 2023. I think it's done so. The product has been good. There's been some great launches. The Top Gun one was the one that came out right after I think we met last time, and obviously that was a huge success. We need more good movies. We are Westfield's heavily invested into movie theaters within our projects, and they're big boxes. And in some cases, we have A+ assets where we're considering maybe we just get rid of the theater because we can do something that's going to drive more traffic and have much more productivity. Again, this is going to be asset specific, and it's going to be expensive to make those decisions. But what is next? And we're always having to have that mentality. And if we're in competitive markets, and we're in the most competitive markets, if we're not constantly challenging ourselves to say what's next, then someone's going to come and steal some of our market share, and that's not going to be good.
It's just a content product question. Like if you have great product that drives visits, people are going to like, movie theaters are not the win or the loss. It's the product that they can deliver. And there's a content question of, to kind of pull back a little bit. We were talking about, the impending football season. I still don't understand why there's no kind of live games at theaters, where you can watch it with a group, where you can have this experience together. There's so many opportunities for that. It just feels like the content perspective needs to evolve in order to continue to drive peaks like this moving forward.
We talked about that last year. I mean, they've got all that downtime and all that space to do things with it, whether it's presentations, company meetings, watching sporting events. Sports are global, and some of the biggest sports in the world have become much more popular here in the U.S. Formula One, Premier League soccer, and the other leagues around the world. I mean, these are opportunities to get fans together in really cool places. I haven't seen, personally, maybe it's happening, but I haven't seen any of these operators really take advantage of it yet. But the Barbie thing, I think the Barbie thing is just crazy, and hopefully there's a bunch more Barbie movies that drive stuff. We had a restaurant across the street do a Barbie menu. It was a Middle Eastern restaurant, and they had like pink hummus and pink drinks, and there was a line to get in there for weeks. Their sales went up over 100% during this period of time. It was crazy.
And then I always make the connection between Barbie and hummus. That's always my.
It was just it was random to me too, but and then some of you probably saw, but Lush redid their store at Century City as well, and it's completely pink. I mean, everything that they reclad the whole storefront, the sign, everything on the inside. It's completely pink, and they're going to keep it like that until they remodel, I think, next year or so. So they're gonna milk it for as long as they can.
That's smart. That's what they should do. A question came in the Northeast. We are experiencing a huge amount of mall repurposing. The product providing retailers seems, meaning I think what the question is asking is, there's this lot of repurposing, and there seems to be less going towards kind of traditional retail. Is that what you're seeing? Do you think that makes sense?
Well, you're probably seeing this stuff more than I am, Ethan. Absolutely. I mean, we sold a number of assets over the last 5 years. Assets that were good, okay, 10 years ago, and they're being repurposed. Some on Long Island, some in Connecticut. It's really hard. Takes a lot of money and patience, but it's kind of like the real estate game, which we're all playing. At the end of the day, everything's cyclical. Someone's going to make money in a real estate deal and someone's probably going to lose money. You very seldomly find kind of two winners in these types of deals.
Yeah, it's super interesting. We are seeing, I think it's, again, it's how retail is changing. If you want things that are more complementary and you have more options, you're going to see folks dip into this. Another question came in, and we'll get into this conversation, which is one of the ones I kind of love to talk about. Do you think, I mean, you mentioned this a little bit, are food courts a draw?
It's a challenge. We've been a victim of kind of our development fever over the last decade, and I think there's a few places we have too many units in them. I definitely think there's a place for the food court in just about every asset. Just about, not always, but just about. The question just becomes, what's the right number? We've got food courts with 12, 14, 16, 18 units. That's just too many, especially if we're going to be layering in that market defining dining, the great fast casual, the great full service restaurants that people can come and go to as well. So you'll see in some of our assets, we'll be pulling back on the number of units, adding more seats so that kind of that proverbial pie that you've got, right, for the food court total sales, each piece represents a partner, a retailer, or a restaurant. We'd like the piece of pie to get bigger for each so that sales can go up. It gets a little thin when you have too many uses. And we've been a victim of that, thinking that we could lease too many and overdevelop some of our food courts in some places. I think the food hall craze has been one that's been good for a number of developers who've been successful. We launched and opened up our first food hall in partnership with Robert Earl, opened in April at Westfield Topanga in the North Valley of Los Angeles. It's been extremely successful. And based upon its success, we're going to look to replicate that model in partnership in other places. And I think that's where we're also going to say, if you're going to add a food hall, then do you need a food court and vice versa, depending upon the size. Again, I think that's a lot of fast casual dining. It depends on the uses you're going in. And if you are going to have both, which we have both at Topanga, you'll likely turn down the number of units a bit. But I mean, look, you've got customers who love to eat at Sarku and Panda and Chick-fil-A. I mean, they do huge volume everywhere they're at. Chipotle. The question then becomes, how many of those units are constantly vacant, constantly turning over in some of these food courts? Because in a food court, you've got to be serving something that's super familiar to the customer. And I think we've all made that mistake where it's like, oh, this is a cool concept, let's put that in the food court. But it's not familiar to the customer. It just doesn't work, and you end up having to replace them. And it's unfortunate because we're all kind of chasing that next cool concept and hoping it's going to be it. More often than not, if it's not a familiar cuisine and something the consumer knows, it's not going to work in the food court.
This is, it's interesting because we're discussing this, and then a question came in, and I'll use this discussion as a preface to the question. But talking about the need to have kind of, what is the role does the food court play? You want to have diversity, but you also don't want to have too much competition between them. The types of retail and the values they can all bring, and which ones fit and which ones don't. It seems like the difference in regions and each location. And a question came in like, how has the leasing process changed, and who is an ideal leasing agent today? Comes to mind. Who's the type of person who can deal best with this type of complexity?
Yeah, that's a great question. If you figure it out, let me know. That's a tough one. We've been fortunate. I think I told you yesterday, Ethan, we've been fortunate to hire some really great people in the last year and a half. If I was to think about the things that have made them successful coming into a company new, look, they're driven. They're self-driven. They don't need to be told what to do. They have a passion for retail and placemaking. They get a real joy out of seeing something open up and seeing the customers interact with their ideas. I think more often than not, in the past, we were plagued by leasing kind of driving businesses, but leasing also working in their own silos and doing what they want. Especially here at Westfield, it's a much more cohesive team unit. You've got asset managers, operating managers, all putting ideas in so that we can come up with the next best ideas together. because you can't just have one person inputting on what we think or the direction a place can go. You're going to have a lot of brain power from a lot of different people to kind of figure out what that next great thing is going to be. But look, great leasing people love what they do. It's almost as if you're getting paid for a hobby you do anyways. Those are the ones that I find are most successful.
I doesn't feel like the term that was introduced to me when I entered kind of the world of retail real estate, as opposed to kind of the online side of it, was placemaking. And this, you're creating every piece is part of creating something much bigger and much more interesting for specific consumers. I think that the places that really kind of embrace that concept of it's not just the success of a single element, it is how it fits into this wider tapestry, I think is what makes it so interesting for the people who like it.
I agree. And you've got to be visual in your mind, like see it before it exists, having that ability. Because I mean, as much data as we want, which you can help provide us, at some point it's not just science. There's a massive art to what we do in creating these places, from the artistic view of the designers bringing in something that the customer's really going to relate to the merchandising of our places. You can't just put anybody next to one another. And in many cases, you can't do it the way you did it 5 or 10 years ago. So you've got to come up with that new mix of partners, those new categories that meld together. And hopefully you don't do it wrong, because that's an expensive mistake.
No, we're getting a ton of questions. Please keep them coming. This is our favorite when we kind of go off the rails with lots of questions. So please keep sending those in. But someone asked, omni-channel initiatives leveraging the mall. How do you see the focus on making the mall a bigger part of the omni-channel journey?
That's a good question. Look, I think the digital out-of-home market is something that a lot of retailers are starting to capitalize on, connecting brands with their retail experience in their stores. You look at Target, Walmart, they're doing it in an amazing way. I feel very fortunate to work with our internal media group here on our sales team, because they've been on the forefront of a lot of this as well. We handle all of our digital advertising in-house, so it gives us the ability to connect directly with retailers and brands, and often then connect them together for different types of partnerships. But I think like we've always, as landlords, you're always trying to perfect that customer journey. As someone comes to our places, what do they see? How do they feel? In my mind, there's also a digital journey now. What are the touch points that you're going to have with this consumer as they come to our places, when they arrive? Where's the digital located? How big is it? How small is it? And how does it interact with the customer? And is it smart digital? Are they tracking you? Where are you going? I know that freaks some people out, but that technology is there and it's very anonymized. We're using it to a big degree to help us understand how the customers are traveling, where they're going. And ultimately, we can then deliver data back to our retail and brand partners, letting them know which creatives work best. So if you've got 2 different creatives in a shopping center, we can tell you how long the customer is looking at each one, which ones are working better. Take out this one because it's not working. That kind of omni-channel, from online to the customer journey to the digital journey, I think is a big opportunity that there's lots of improvement still to be had by each of us.
I mean, how do you like? Because I think one of the things that's funny, because we have this slide up of like, you think about brands like Lululemon and Nike, and Nike's been very open. Part of the reason people want people to come to their stores is not just to buy the product there; it's to try it on, it's to fall in love with the brand, it's to have that experience. If there you have retailers that are using the space for a much more holistic gain, that's not just about kind of how many products I'm selling in the store. How do you align yourself with that trend? How do you kind of establish your role if the sale, even if I walk into the store and I end up making the purchase online, how do you just establish your value in that process?
It's a tough question, because at the end of the day, I mean, to be a really great landlord, you have to be sales obsessed, right? You have to know how much total commerce is going on at your place and how do you make it a bigger. If you've got an asset that does $400 million annually, right? What are the things that are going to get you to 500, 600 million when you partner with someone who isn't as focused maybe? And I don't know if Nike is or isn't, but a retailer who's saying, I might just not be selling anything, I might be helping just my brand. Then you've got to look at the other things. Are you getting more traffic? Are you bringing in more customers? And how do you get them to then do other things? Nike is one of the most unique, best brands in the world, obviously. and it's got the ability to have retail stores that can do business at high volumes and can connect people to the brand in a way that it's really hard to do in other places. And the retailers that they wholesale to don't do as good of a job, and you're seeing that as they're pulling product back from a number of them, and you're watching the sales go up and down across some of their large partners, depending upon how strong their relationship is with Nike. Lululemon, on the other hand, I mean, I think everyone's waiting for that increase to kind of slow down a little bit, but I mean, it's an anomaly right now. There isn't anybody out there that's kind of on the streak that they've been on. They've been doing an amazing job in just about every aspect of their business. Stores are getting bigger, but their sales keep growing at the same relative clip. We've seen lots of retailers over the past couple of decades grow their store size, then just to retract it because they realized they didn't need all that space. We've got Lululemon stores that just perform at huge volumes.
It is mind-blowing to me how well Lululemon does because it goes against so many of the expectations you had for a retailer that puts so many locations within a fairly tight proximity, and
Yep.
yet they do so well. I think a piece, we just, we had a piece that came out. We were looking at Lululemon's ability to grab a larger male audience, Nike's ability to expand beyond their kind of core audience. I think a lot of it is just these retailers are just operating at a very special level. I'm going to even skip the holiday questions because we have a bunch more that came in, and I want to try to get to as many of these as we possibly can.
Unprepared
So
questions, those are always fun.
I mean, we keep it exciting, Colin. That's what makes it so much fun. And then, so we had a question in the Midwest. We've seen several malls repurposed to feature almost exclusively luxury brand stores. Are these malls the future to draw in experiential shoppers that are millennials and Gen Z? Do you think we're going to see a much harder shift towards luxury?
Well, I think you've already seen it. And I'm going to say this next comment is really just geared towards the larger cities and CBDs, but I believe there's a time, and it's almost there, where in these large markets where you've got multiple assets, you're going to have those with luxury and those without. And those with luxury, because luxury doesn't just want to be with luxury anymore. They want to be with the daily needs, the services, the cafes, the really cool places that people are also going. But you can have centers with luxury and centers without, and those that have been able to win luxury and bring more luxury in over the last couple of years versus losing it, you're going to see them kind of widen the gap between the haves and the have-nots within these markets. Now, luxury doesn't exist in every market. So the markets that don't have luxury, the question is then how do you just do the best you can with the consumer catchment that you have, and ultimately what does that next rung down look like? But again, having the highest end retail in a given market gives you a distinct advantage for a number of reasons.
All right. So a last question, because I think it's an interesting one. You mentioned that the landlord has a responsibility for getting traffic to the mall. Where does the responsibility for getting traffic to move throughout the mall? Are there innovative methods to help in this area?
I mean, I think that's the one that it's a constant moving target. You might have an area of your shopping center that feels great today. All of a sudden, you're focused on another area. You open up a couple restaurants, a couple stores, and the traffic patterns start to change. You guys provide great heat maps that show us, where are people actually spending time within our centers. And it's funny because it's often the busiest places are the places the retail partners don't recognize just by looking on a lease plan. So this is where, as sales professionals, we've got to figure out a better way to say, hey, this is where people are going. This is what it currently looks like. And you've then got to sell that ultimate vision and journey that we're working on. But look, I think your guys' tool on the heat maps is a super innovative way for us to figure out where people are going, and then ultimately what types of people are going. What are the segments that are traveling in different parts of our assets? Some of our assets are really, really big and overbuilt in some cases. And we've got areas that are just, I mean, they're challenged. You've got so much retail and they're hard to get people there. In some cases, you just want to fill it up and wait till the rest of the place feels really good, and then you can put focus on it. But if we can do a good job of kind of bulletproofing and focusing on the areas of our assets where people are spending the most time and energy, that gives you an advantage over 80% of the people out there.
I mean, I love the idea of, you mentioned this early, like all of the science and all the technology in this space is supporting the art in this space, which is at the end of the day, the people doing the work, the folks working on the leasing side, trying to figure out how to maximize the impact of these locations on the retail side. And that is how to view it, as an input that is going to help maximize decision makings. And with that, I just want to, I mean, Colin, thank you so much for being here. This webinar is always one of my favorites. It has become it's a highlight of our webinar calendar. We appreciate you doing it again. We look forward to you. We're like guilting you into doing it next year.
Absolutely, super stoked, and thanks everybody for asking questions. That made it a lot more fun.
Yeah, this was fantastic. Everyone, thank you so much for joining. Please look out. We'll have our next webinar coming in just a few weeks. It is focused on the restaurant space with the amazing RJ Hodavi. So please look out for that. Thank you for being here. Have a wonderful rest of the day.